All right, let's return to this story once again. Colonists have landed on this planet. They want to produce food and shelter. That's their goal. They've got a supercomputer that's figuring out how to do everything perfectly. Okay, and we've been learning kind of the structure that of the information that the supercomputer has, and now we're going to put all the pieces together and sort of describe what the supercomputer is going to try and do to satisfy its colonists and do everything in the best possible way. So in one of the previous units, we talked about how the computer models the technologies they have to produce food and shelter, and we can imagine every other thing they might want is also in a database in there with instructions on how to do it. We're just going to focus on these two, but the lessons are more general. The computer can take information about the technology they have, the endowments of labor and capital and natural resources, and it can create a production possibilities frontier. That tells them sort of the menu of options for the most possible food and shelter you can have. But there's lots of different options, and to figure out how to balance the production of food or shelter, we had to bring in the preferences of the consumers and start to understand what do they actually want. The consumers in this case are the colonists. So are they going to focus mostly on like food? Like that's all they care about really, is they want a place to eat. They care a lot about shelter. Are they pretty happy with whatever the Soylent or whatever that they were eating before? Or do they want some kind of mix between the two? And so the computer has information about their preferences. It represents these as utility functions and difference curves. And now we'll put all the pieces together and discuss what it needs to figure out. Now, this is a hypothetical, fake example. But the reason we do this is because these issues arise in the real world. Okay, I'm not trying to waste your time. Economies and governments have to figure out how to allocate resources and how to set up the rules of the game of trade and bargaining and how an economy functions. And to do so, and we're going to basically, through this fictional example and through this course, learn the sort of strengths and weaknesses of various approaches. And what we're focusing on at this point is we're kind of going to analyze what I would call like the centralized control idea. This is where there's a central authority. In this case, it's the supercomputer that makes all the decisions and has all the information, and it uses that information to make optimal decisions. The polar opposite is something like total anarchy, a totally decentralized government or lack of government where every person, there is no higher authority giving anyone commands about what to do. At least that's the idea in principle. And even though we're looking at this in this kind of sci-fi scenario, these things have real world sort of analogs. Nobody is completely in either of these camps. They're more like a spectrum or a continuum, and we can lie along them, okay? So we can be in a society that's closer to centralized control, so old Soviet economies, modern Soviet economies, where there's sort of the government owns the means of production and sets prices, not even prices, but just allocates and makes the decisions about what will be produced, is closer to centralized control. But even there, it's not as stark as in the example we're doing in this class, where it's a computer that makes all the decisions. Even in like the actual USSR, there were still markets in certain places. Okay, so it wasn't as extreme. On the other hand, we've got total anarchy, where there's no government and everybody is free to make their own decisions. But again, that's not really practiced in the real world, except maybe in like some kind of war zones and things like that, where there's sort of a complete breakdown of central authority. What we have instead is stuff that's more in the middle, like we might put somewhere closer down here, like a free market economy. So now we have a government that enforces property rights, for example, and rules of trade, but maybe it doesn't do much else. Okay? Up here, we might have something more like a mixed economy, where some types of goods are produced by the government. So some industries are completely sort of government controlled and they don't use the market to make decisions, but other resources are allocated via a market mechanism. We haven't even talked about markets yet. We all know what they are. We live with them. But we're going to kind of, in this unit, focus on the problems of, the strengths and weaknesses of centralized control. Okay. So in this section, what we're going to do first is talk about some of the problems of figuring out how to balance the preferences of different people when they compete. Then we're going to come up with a criteria that is not good, a criteria called Pareto Efficiency that is sort of a minimum standard that we hope to meet. It's not good enough, but if we can't hit even that, then we're doing really badly. So it's a minimum standard. And then we'll talk about how you would meet that standard. And then the last part is we'll introduce 4 problems with using centralized control to meet this Pareto efficiency standard.